All right, now let me show you how to implement caching. First, we have to fix the base URL. We should change the port number to 9001. Now, in index.js, let's dispatch this action for the second time after 2 seconds. So I'm going to copy this line. Now let's set a timeout. In this function, we're going to dispatch the load bugs action after 2 seconds. Now here in Redux DevTools, you can see we requested the bugs, which led to an API call, and then we received the bugs. The second time we requested the bugs, again, we had another API call. This is not what we want. So if the last time we fetched the bugs was, let's say 10 minutes ago, we don't want to refetch them again for the second time. So let me show you how to implement caching. So earlier we added this property in the bug slice, last fetch. With this, every time we receive the bugs from the server, we have to set the last fetch property to the current time. So date.now. This returns the current time as a timestamp. Let me show you. So let's look at this date. There it is. It's a large number. We're not adding a JavaScript date object here because JavaScript date objects are not serializable. So that is the reason we're using a timestamp here. Okay. Now, back in the bug slice, we need to modify the load bugs action creator such that if the last time we received the bugs was less than 10 minutes ago, we're not going to call the server again. Okay. Now we can scroll down to find this action, or let me show you a shortcut. So if you go to the Go menu on the top, here you can see go to symbol in file. Look at the shortcut. On Mac, it's Shift, Command, and O. So Shift, Command, and O, you want to go to the load bugs function. That is much faster. So in this function, we need to get the value of the last fetch property. How can we do that? Well, currently this action creator returns a plain action object because in this function, we're calling this other action creator, which returns a plain JavaScript object. So here's the signature of this function. This function returns a plain JavaScript object. In this function, we don't have access to the current state. If you want to get the current state, we have to return a function here. Earlier, you learned that with our Thunk middleware, we can dispatch functions. And these functions can optionally receive 2 arguments, dispatch and getState. So I'm going to rewrite this action creator so you can compare them side by side. Loadbugs is a function that returns a function with 2 parameters, dispatch and getState. So this is the function that we're returning, right? Now in this function, we can call getState. Then we go to entities, bugs, and last fetch. Or we can use object destructuring to pick the last fetch property from this bugs object. That is better. Now, let's copy this code and paste it over here. So over here, we're calling this other action creator, which returns an action object. Now, in order to start a workflow, we need to explicitly dispatch this action. Otherwise, nothing is going to happen. So here we need to call dispatch. Okay. Now, we don't need this old implementation. So before going any further, let's log the last fetch constant. Here in the console, it was initially null. Now it is this value. Beautiful. So the last thing we want to do is to compare this with the current time. To compare datetime values, I use a library called Moment.js. You're probably familiar with it. It's very popular. So let's install Moment. Good. Now we should import it on the top. Import Moment from Moment. Now let's go back to the load bugs action. There we are. So when we call Moment, we get the current date time. Now here we can call the diff method to calculate the difference between the current date time and another date time. Here we're going to wrap the last fetch constant with a Moment object. So moment of last fetch. Now as the second argument to the diff method, we're going to pass minutes, and this is going to return the difference in minutes. So let's store that in a constant called diff in minutes. Now, if diff in minutes is less than, let's say 10, then we're going to return. So we're not going to call the server for the second time. Now, save the changes. So we have one set of events. And if you look at the Redux tab, you can see we requested the bugs. We had an API call, but the second time we requested the bugs, there was no API call. Now, in this imaginary application, we're implementing caching only in the bug slice. But if you want to implement caching in multiple slices, you don't want to repeat all this logic over and over. So then you need to refactor this into a generalized solution that you can reuse in multiple places. Also, here we have this magic number. This is something you should avoid in real applications. Ideally, you should store these values in a configuration file. So you should have a single file where you specify how long your cache should be valid. You don't want to throw these numbers all over the place in your source code. So that's all about caching. Next, we're going to talk about saving data to the server.